Howdy, fellow Fall of 2019 Healthcare MBA students. My name is George Valdez. In our discussion today for Dr. Gransky's Legal Environment of Business presentation, I'll be discussing 2 Pesos versus Taco Cabana. This case immediately caught my attention. As a native Texan with Mexican heritage, I grew up in Houston and was raised on the battlefield of this taco war. Indeed, I was caught on both sides of the conflict. My uniform, which was mid-1980s middle school attire, was often stained with beans, cheese, and salsa as collateral damage. The significance of this case is that previously there was reinforcement of trademark protection, but trade dress protection was not well established. Taco Cabana opened in 1978 in the city of San Antonio, Texas. Its decorations were vivid colors, Mexican-style murals, and a festive atmosphere. 2 Pesos opened in Houston in 1985 with a very similar theme to Taco Cabana. Rather than a pastel pink, it was a pastel blue. The building, layout, decorations, and menu were very clearly a shout out to Taco Cabana. Taco Cabana entered the Houston market the following year, and the year after that, filed a lawsuit against 2 Pesos alleging trade dress infringement under the Langham Act. The Langham Act is the primary guiding legislation in the United States used to regulate trademark protection in advertising. Taco Cabana looked to assert its protection of this trade dress. In district court, the case went to trial by jury. The judge asked the jury to consider 5 issues, which were: does Taco Cabana have a trade dress? Is the trade dress functional? Is it distinctive? Does it acquire secondary meaning? And does the alleged infringement create likelihood of confusion for customers? The jury concluded that 2 Pesos had intentionally and deliberately infringed on Taco Cabana's trade dress. The jury found no second meaning. Still, they ruled in favor of Taco Cabana because they felt customers were likely confused regarding the goods and services related. But 2 Pesos appealed this decision. Because the jury found Taco Cabana's trade dress was not functional, it is not entitled to protection under the Langham Act. The Court of Appeals agreed with the district court and cited legal precedent, which said secondary meaning is only necessary when the trademark is indistinctive. The Court of Appeals felt that mandating a business be both distinctive and acquire secondary meaning would make it more difficult for a company to prove uniqueness, and prove more costly for startup businesses to demonstrate their unique identity. But is trade dress protected like trademark? Because that issue had no legal precedence, we looked to the Supreme Court for guidance. This challenge was legitimate. A previous decision was overturned because the jury was not instructed to consider secondary meaning. So, one case was overturned due to lack of secondary meaning. Taco Cabana's doesn't need secondary meaning. The Supreme Court favored Taco Cabana and agreed its distinctiveness is protected under the Langham Act without proof that the trade dress has secondary meaning. The main consideration was again the question of whether this behavior created confusion to ordinary customers as to the source of the restaurant's goods and services. Justice Thomas felt the language of the Langham Act is enough to support the decision on its own. He said trade dress is uniquely capable and specific as a trademark. He also made clear that a first user of an arbitrary concept should be entitled to protection of that concept without having to prove meaning. Justice Scalia agreed that the language of the Langham Act is broad enough to embrace the distinctive trade dress. Justice Stevens agreed and felt the Langham Act has transformed over the decades and feels this current day interpretation is consistent with its purpose. 2 Pesos continued to operate and failed to change its appearance in violation of the court order. In November 1992, Taco Cabana filed another lawsuit of $5 million in district court seeking damages related to this failure to comply. Unexpectedly, the conflict ended in somewhat of a win-win conclusion 2 months later. The future viability of 2 Pesos was clearly in question. 2 Pesos agreed to sell its remaining assets to Taco Cabana for $18 million. Because 2 Pesos buildings were so similar to Taco Cabana quickly and efficiently further expanded its presence. Implications on subsequent litigation. The two paces decision had an impact on many subsequent cases based on the fact that they were inherently distinctive. Each of these decisions supported the fact that distinctive trade dress is sufficient to be protective. In fact, Maker's Mark whiskey proved that the red wax on their whiskey cap was protected against not so much of a rival tequila company, but this red wax on the cap is distinctive. Alternative resolutions. Critics of this decision were frustrated because the Supreme Court did not provide specific guidance or predictability. The Supreme Court reasserted to the appeals court decision that trade dress is protected if either it was distinctive or acquired secondary meaning. It did not need to prove both. My opinion is critics must consider that the lack of clarity is intended to exist to allow for broad and interpretation of the discouragement of businesses to create confusion with another brand. Industry leaders, such as the International Trademark Association, should create more precise definition. And this will be helpful in future decisions, but it is not the Supreme Court's calling to provide such detail. Although the Lanham Act was enacted well before the rapid development and continued development of trademarks, marketing, and advertising, it continues to be a significant point of reference and protection of business. And that, my friends, is the sweet taste of justice.